Do you believe in magic? How about the devil? Do you believe what your eyes show you? To the medieval mind, the answers to all of these questions would be a somewhat resounding yes. As long as any of these three questions can be answered with a yes, someone will show up and try and take advantage of that belief. They go by a number of names in our modern age: snake oil salesman, scammer, AI bots, con men, and so on. But today they go by one name, the name of a truly unusual fixture in history, one who had a hand in atrocities throughout France, all for a heavier coin purse. Today they go by the name of Francois Prelati. I want to start this out by saying that this character beat Herc in the community behind the servants vote, which you can vote on in the future by subbing to my Twitch, joining the YouTube membership, or joining my Patreon. Genuinely though, I am shocked that this character managed to beat out the big man Herc. Anyway, back to the video. Prelati is, for lack of a better descriptor, somewhat of a ghost in history. We don't really know who they were before meeting Gilles de Rais. We don't have a good read on their early life. All that we know with any level of certainty is who they presented themselves as in front of Gilles. So, to understand how this meeting even occurred, we need to know a bit about Gilles de Rais. Gilles was a noble in the Kingdom of France during the first half of the 1400s. He has two major claims to fame. The first is that he fought alongside Joan of Arc, and the second is that he was a child predator and serial killer. For that first part, Gilles was a companion and oftentimes savior of Joan of Arc during war. On more than several occasions, Gilles himself managed to bail Joan out of a sticky situation using both his intuition and military prowesses. In fact, many of Joan's victories can be attributed to the amazingly militaristic mind of Gilles, who was nothing short of a master of artillery. It's honestly kind of strange that this isn't referenced in-game somehow. Joan's loss and eventual capture was during a time when she made two different mistakes. The first was not listening to the voice of God in her head that told her who and where to attack, and the second was not having Gilles around during that attack. There is a belief that Gilles tried to form a group to break Joan out of prison, but as we know, that didn't go as planned. However, the time that Gilles spent with Joan seemed to shape him in a number of ways. See, Joan of Arc is very strange. A tanned, tomboyish farm girl, yes, we were robbed of this, who claimed to hear the voice of God, appeared before the king and managed to convince him that her story was true. Back in the day, the capital C church was more or less treated as a fact without questioning it, and someone claiming to do this could have been seen as heretical, which is what eventually got her burned as a witch. However, there are tales that show that she quite possibly was hearing something. Gilles was present during a time when Joan was riding with the army and stopped by a church. Here, she greeted the priest and said that she had come to get her sword. The priest, and everyone else present for that matter, were incredibly confused, and Joan, claiming the voice of God told her where it was, found a pristine ancient sword hidden away in the church. This event, among many others, spooked those around her. Faith is a very strange thing. By its very nature, it is believing in something that you cannot confirm is real. Therefore, for all but the most devout, there will always be a lingering sense in the back of one's mind that they may be wrong. Seeing someone who claims to hear the voice of God being able to do things that could be considered miracles makes it more real, and while it's affirming, it's also kind of terrifying. We'll come back with that with Gilles here in a bit. That leads us to the other part of Gilles' life. Being a rich noble and having been actually promoted to Marshal of France, Gilles had quite the hoard of gold that he was sitting on and was functionally untouchable. After having led the life of a warrior for so long, you would think the concept of finally having some semblance of peace would be welcome. But it wasn't. It's hard to really gauge if Gilles himself was always like this, or if something happened to him during the wars that turned him this way, but Gilles eventually began to murder children, with he himself claiming that his first assault on a child was around 1432. This spree went on until an investigation confirmed his involvement, along with a number of other crimes that included threatening a deacon. This murder spree supposedly claimed the lives of over 100 children. Now you may be asking yourself, how could he have gotten away with this for so long and no one suspected anything? Well, quite frankly, they did. But no one seemed to care. For the most part, it's believed that the children that went missing under Gilles were the children of peasants or those who had lost their families during the war. Children who, for the most part, no one would miss or care are missing. A common practice at the time for desperate families was to send their children to the castles of lords to beg in the hopes that they would come home with food, money, or scraps given by the lord. And Gilles was known to take in the ones that he liked the most with the promises of a meal and a better life, only for them to never be seen again. This, combined with his status as a marshal, made it so that he was more or less untouchable. If you typed a comment about how he was actually innocent and that this was all a fabrication, bear with me, we're going to be talking about that later. It was during this second phase of Gilles' life when he became interested in the occult. See, being around Joan of Arc was like the long-given advice on how to best the devil. If the devil ever appears before you with an offer, laugh in his face. For him showing you that he is real confirms that so is God, and that while earthly pleasures shall last in the life, the holy ones shall last eternal. Gilles had been given a level of confirmation that maybe, just maybe, God was in fact real, but he himself saw things in the opposite light. If God was real, then everything else in the Bible must be real, like magic. Gilles had entered a bit of a hard time, squandering his fortune in a number of ways, not the least of which was him putting on a massive play about Joan of Arc that had a free feast and new costumes made for it daily, and yes, that's also true, so he needed money. What magical property was known in the medieval ages to produce money? Alchemy. Specifically, alchemy done with a contract through the devil, which for some reason he was very, very hung up on. Gilles turned to requesting the aid of magicians and alchemists, functionally putting out an all call to anyone that he was looking for someone who could perform magic. For a while, many magicians would come before Gilles and show them their tricks, claiming to be able to produce gold or summon creatures at their whims, but when they were asked to perform it consistently, fell flat and were sent away. That is, save for one exception that is genuinely kind of hilarious. On one occasion, a man came before Gilles and said that he could conjure a demon. Not being the first time he had heard such a thing, Gilles asked for proof, and then the guy did it. It's a bit spotty and certainly could be hearsay, but in this one instance, whatever trick this guy pulled, he did so convincingly, or perhaps actually did manage to summon something that scared Gilles so bad that he leapt out a window in fright and demanded the magician leave. After several more failed attempts, save for that last one person finally rose to the challenge and managed to stick around. Francois Prelati. Let's delve into the little that we know about Prelati's early life. Born in the Italian village of Moncaccini-Terme, they worked as a member of the church before retiring young with the grace of a bishop somewhere around Arezzo. He did not remain inactive for long and put aside his teachings of the cloth instead to study alchemy, and more specifically, necromancy in Florence with the intent of creating the Philosopher's Stone. Prelati was asked to visit by an advisor of Gilles and made his way to him around 1439. Prelati himself was described as being graceful and olive-skinned, as well as learned in all manner of arts. But most importantly, he made the claim that he was contracted with a demon called Baron. This sparked interest in Gilles, and Prelati managed to gain his trust by promising that he would conjure the demon, who would appear as a young, handsome man dressed in blue with a purple cloak. This was, of course, only if there was fair compensation for Prelati. Gilles agreed and provided the money asked, and after putting on the ritual, no demon appeared. This would happen several times with Prelati, making the claim that Baron was upset or not satisfied with the compensation. To tide the marshal over, there would be times when Prelati himself would take on the guise of Baron, or hire somebody else to wear the disguise and run through the woods to fool Gilles. But this only worked on occasions because the ultimate goal of summoning Baron was to have him turn lead into gold, a significantly more difficult feat. Growing weary of the continued failures, Gilles questioned Prelati about the results, to which Prelati gave Gilles grave news. Baron was no longer satisfied with money, but now wanted blood. Supposedly, he requested the blood and body parts of a child to fulfill this wish. Now, here's where a level of questioning occurs. Did Prelati say this knowing Gilles was a murderer? Or did he make a request so outlandish that perhaps he could take the money he had earned and run? Regardless of the why, Gilles agreed and produced a child that he tortured, killed, and dismembered for the parts needed in the ritual. This put Prelati in a rather precarious position. They were a necromancer, which was already frowned upon, but perhaps the reality of what was occurring sank in at one point, and now they knew this was not the first time that Gilles had done such a thing. But, rather than run or abandon the project, Prelati seemed to relish in it. For the next year, Prelati would aid Gilles in both his murders and procuring of his victims, as well as using them for his heinous and ultimately pointless rituals. There are even rumors stating that Prelati and Gilles were involved sexually, which is not impossible because Gilles himself preferred young, beautiful boys to be his partner, which Prelati did fit the description of. In fact, there's a pretty heinous quote that Gilles did not relish in killing ugly children. All of this, however, would eventually culminate in Gilles eventually being discovered and arrested, along with Prelati and a number of Gilles' other servants who were aiding him. Gilles had several bouts of madness that likely led to this discovery, not the least of which was him setting up his own church to house children that would eventually go missing, or him riding a horse into a church to threaten a deacon with a battle axe, or him trying to forcefully reclaim a castle that he had rightfully sold. He constantly was butting heads with the authorities, while complaints also came in that children just sort of went missing wherever Gilles was. Eventually, Gilles was found guilty on 49 counts, including sodomy, perverse murder, attempt to summon a demon, performing witchcraft, and child murder, as well as a number of other crimes. Initially, Gilles claimed this was a setup to steal the riches he didn't have, but after being tortured, admitted the crimes. Pause. This key factor is why people want to proclaim that Gilles de Rais is innocent. The current campaign to rebrand Gilles de Rais as actually not a child serial killer comes from people looking at the evidence that we have in the modern day and the accounts that we have from the trial. In a modern court of law, there are too many factors that are ambiguous to justify putting Gilles to death. Evidence, such as witness testimony, was taken at face value by people about the crimes and the missing children. I myself am guilty of believing this for a while. Until I did the research. The key problem that we run into with this trial in particular is that there is evidence to suggest a few things. One, Gilles was in fact crazy. There's a number of tales aside from the child killing that could be brought up that would equally get him excommunicated if not killed. These were also brought up in the trial. It's also a known fact that Gilles was functionally broke. So the claim that people wanted his riches sounds like paranoia more than anything else. Next is the fact that there was physical evidence found in his castle. Gilles had ordered his servants to burn and dispose of the bodies of some 40 children at the castle to hide his crimes, which they did and testified to doing, leading this to appear to be hearsay. Except that they found 2 bodies that had been overlooked, lending credence to the crimes. But even if this is to be discounted, people from all walks of life, be they peasants, soldiers, officials, or other servants, all confirmed one thing. Children that went near the castle oftentimes wound up not coming back. While eyewitness testimony is certainly not reliable, if enough random people are saying the same thing, then maybe there's something to it. Regardless, even if he wasn't a child murderer, he was an occultist trying to summon a demon for God knows what reason and went crazy doing it. For his crimes, Gilles was sentenced to hang, along with other close confidants. Save for Prelati. Prelati somehow managed to get a life sentence plea instead, avoiding his inevitable fate. Not content to sit in prison though, Prelati managed to escape and seek refuge at Anjou under the name Francois de Montcachin, where he used his sleight of hand and alchemical skills to produce a silver ingot, impressing the Lord Yolande of Aragon, and getting him the position of Captain Alchemist. He could have lived the remainder of his life in this occupation comfortably, but instead wanted revenge against those who had him imprisoned. One day, when Geoffrey Le Ferran, the man who had him imprisoned, now the treasurer of France, came by, Prelati struck. He invited the treasurer to Anjou before imprisoning him. He claimed that it was Le Ferran's fault that he had been imprisoned and planned to hold him there for a massive ransom. He and other Gilles co-conspirators tortured the man physically and even planted false documents to defame him to the Admiral of France, who was married to Gilles' only daughter. This lasted for 2.5 months before Rene of Anjou caught wind of it and immediately demanded the release of the treasurer. Prelati pretended to let him go before putting him back in the dungeon, and eventually a contingency of 50 knights sent by the King of France arrived demanding the treasurer be released. Prelati still refused and sent his own men out to remove them, resulting in one of the king's knights being killed. The treasurer was finally released after Rene of Anjou paid the ransom, and Prelati was eventually found guilty of his crimes, being arrested and burned at the stake as well. His other accomplices were forced to return what had been taken from the treasurer. Thus was the life of Francois Prelati, a strange and overly clever man who found himself at the heart of a horrible crime and relished his time in it, wallowing in the filth of it all. And with that, we now have Prelati in the books. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought down below. This is a rare instance of me doing a sermon that isn't released in-game yet, but hey, people are crazy about goth girls. Do all the YouTube stuff. Check out my links down below. But for now, keep your chin up. Peace.